Welcome to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. Pilgrim's Well is a resource for Christians wherever they are in their journey. We're excited to have you join us on this next episode. Hi guys, welcome back to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. I'm your host Alex Sigma in the Pilgrim's Well studio with my other host,
Paul van Engelenhoven.
And we're so glad that you joined us today. We're going to continue where we left off, chapter 26. Christian and hopeful at the Delectable Mountains. Let's dive right in. Then they went forward until they came to the Delectable Mountains, which belong to the Lord of that hill about which we have spoken before. Thus they drew nearer to the mountains so as to look more closely at the gardens, the orchards, the vineyards, and the fountains of water, where they also drank and washed themselves and freely ate of the fruit of the vine. Now on the tops of these mountains there were shepherds feeding their flocks and standing alongside of the highway. Therefore the pilgrims approached them, and, as is customary when such travelers are weary and pause to talk, they leaned on their staves and inquired, "To whom do these delectable mountains belong? And who owns the sheep that are feeding here?"
These mountains are Emmanuel's land, and they are within sight of the city. The sheep are also his, and he laid down his life for them.
"Is this the way to the celestial city?"
You are going in the right direction.
"How much further do we have to go?"
It is too far for any except those who shall certainly arrive there.
"Is the way ahead safe or dangerous?"
It is safe for those for whom it is to be safe, but transgressors shall undoubtedly fall along the way.
"Is there a place here where pilgrims who are weary and faint may find temporary rest?"
The Lord of these mountains has given us orders that we should not neglect the provision of hospitality for strangers. Therefore, the refreshing and good features of this place are at your disposal.
I also saw in my dream that when the shepherds recognized that they were wayfaring men, they put some questions to them which were answered as in other places.
From where have you come?
And,
How did you enter the way?
and,
What means have you used to persevere thus far?
for they understood that few pilgrims who first set out and travel a distance yet show their face at these mountains. But when the shepherds heard their answers and were pleased with them, they looked upon them very lovingly and said,
Welcome to the Delectable Mountains.
Now the shepherds, whose names were Knowledge, Experience, Watchful, and Sincere, took them by the hand and conducted them to their tents where they partook of a prepared feast. Moreover, they said,
We would like you to stay here for a while and become acquainted with us. Though even more, we recommend that you comfort yourselves with the good health that these delectable mountains provide.
The pilgrims indicated that they would be happy to stay, and so they retired to a restful sleep because it was now very late. Then I saw in my dream that in the morning the shepherds invited Christian and Hopeful to walk with them upon the mountains. So they joined them and were escorted for a while with a pleasant view on every side. Then the shepherds said to one another,
Shall we show these pilgrims some of the wonders that are to be seen here?
So upon agreeing that they should do this, the guests were first taken to the top of the hill called Error, which was very steep on the farthest side. Then there they were told to look down to the bottom. So Christian and Hopeful peered down, and there, at the bottom, they saw several men all dashed to pieces, having fallen from the top. Then Christian said, What does this mean? The shepherds answered,
Have you not heard of those who were led into error through their listening to Hymenaeus and Philetus with regard to the faith of the resurrection of the body?
They answered, Yes. And the shepherds replied,
Those who are lying dashed to pieces at the bottom of this mountain are they, and to this day they have remained unburied. As you can see, they are an example to others to take care lest they clamber too high or come too near the brink of this mountain.
Then I saw that the shepherds took them to the top of another mountain named Caution, and directed them to look some distance away. Having done this, the pilgrims thought that they could discern several men walking up and down among a number of tombs. And they noticed that the men were blind because they sometimes stumbled over these tombs and were unable to find their way out from among them. Then Christian said, What does this mean? So the shepherds answered,
Did you not notice, a little below these mountains, a stile that led into a meadow on the left-hand side of this way?
They answered, Yes. Then said the shepherds,
From that stile there goes a path that leads directly to Doubting Castle, which is owned by Giant Despair. And these men, pointing to those wandering among the tombs, were once on pilgrimage, even as you are now. That is until they came to that same stile. And because the right way was rough on their feet in that place, they chose to leave the way and cross over to the meadow. And there they were taken captive by giant despair and cast into Doubting Castle. Now, after they had been kept in a dungeon for a while, the giant eventually put out their eyes and led them to the tombs. There he has left them to wonder to this very day, that the saying of the wise men might be fulfilled. He who wanders out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead.
Then Christian and Hopeful looked at one another, while tears streamed down their faces. Yet they said nothing to the shepherds. Then I saw in my dream that the shepherds took them to another place located in a valley where there was a door in the side of a hill. So they opened the door and invited the pilgrims to look in. Therefore, on looking inside, they saw it was very dark and smoky, and they also thought that they heard there a rumbling sound like a fire, as well as the crying of some tormented souls, and in addition they smelt the stench of brimstone. Then Christian said, "What does this mean?" The shepherds told them in reply,
This is a byway to hell where hypocrites are able to enter. That is, those like Esau who would sell his birthright, or like Judas who would sell his master, or like Alexander who would blaspheme the gospel, or like Ananias and Sapphira who would lie and dissemble.
Hopeful.
I notice that every one of these, at one time or another, put on a display of going on pilgrimage, even as we are now doing. Is that not true? The shepherds. Yes, and they traveled for quite a distance as well. Hopeful. Exactly how far was it possible for pilgrims such as these to travel in their day? That is, while appreciating the fact that they were miserably cast aside. Shepherds. Some can go even further, while others cannot reach as far as these mountains.
Then the pilgrims spoke to each other. We certainly have a need to cry to the strong one for strength.
Shepherds. Yes, and you will need to use it when it is given to you.
By this time the pilgrims had a desire to press forward, and the shepherds agreed that they should do this. So they all walked together toward the end of the mountains. Then the shepherds said to one another,
Let us show the pilgrims here a view of the gates of the celestial city, provided they have the skill to look through our telescope.
So the pilgrims gratefully accepted the invitation. Hence they were led to the top of a high hill called Clear, and given the shepherds' telescope to look through. Then they attempted to look ahead, but the remembrance of the previous sight that the shepherds had shown them made their hands shake. With this impediment, they could not look steadily through the telescope. Yet they thought they saw something like the gate, and some of the glory of the place. Then they went on their way and sang. Thus by the shepherds secrets are revealed, which from all other men are kept concealed. Come to the shepherds then, if you would see things deep, things hid, and that mysterious be. When they were about to depart, one of the shepherds gave them a note, describing the way ahead. Another of them advised the pilgrims to beware of the flatterer. The third told them to take care that they did not sleep on the enchanted ground. And the fourth commended them to God's sustaining mercy as they traveled. So I, Bunyan the narrator, awoke from my dream. First thoughts.
Yeah, the Delectable Mountains, right? It took me a while to kind of ponder through and think what he's talking about. Right? In the Christian life, what are the Delectable Mountains? First of all, I didn't know the meaning of the word delectable as a non-native.
Yeah.
But I figured out it was sweet by asking someone. And do you have any idea what he's referring to? Well, who are the shepherds on the Delectable Mountains?
Yeah, it's interesting. He personifies like knowledge, wisdom, and right. Those were the knowledge, experience, watchful, and sincere.
Mm-hmm.
And what that has to do with delectable, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think he's referring to the church. Right?
Oh,
because you have the shepherds in the church. It's a place where you learn. And the way he talks about it in the beginning is very descriptive. Right? So he says in the beginning, now on the tops of these mountains, there were shepherds feeding their flocks, and standing alongside of the highway. So you have shepherds, so pastors, elders that are feeding the flock, that are helping Christians that come there to be strengthened through these four things, right? The ones that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And they're standing alongside the highway. And the highway is kind of the path of life, right? So in the Bible, there's multiple places where the highway to Zion, for example, where you have, it's really the road to life towards God. So the church is positioned there to help souls on their way with these four qualities, and to feed them sweet things from God that will allow them to make it all the way home. So, in other words, he is telling them, look at this description, and with that in mind, think about what he says at the beginning, that first dialogue.
Right.
Christian said, "Is this the way to the celestial city?" Right? Now, if you think about the context there, in John Bunyan's time, people were saying, well, if you go to a church, you're on your way to heaven.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
So, and this is John Bunyan's response to the shepherds. You are going in the right direction. Right? He's not answering the questions affirmatively. Perfect, yes. He's not saying this is the way to such. You're going in the right direction. Okay, but then he goes further. Christian, how much farther do we go? Do we have to go? Shepherds, it is too far for any except those who shall certainly arrive there. Right? So people that come to church, what John Bunyan is explaining, how much farther is it? Are we almost there? And John Bunyan says very cryptically, it's too far. It's not too far. It's too far, except for those who are certainly going to arrive there. In other words, if you are a true believer, then you will make it. But if you're not a true believer, even going to church will not make you make it. Right?
Yeah.
Then, Christian, is the way ahead safe or dangerous? Shepherds, it is safe for those to whom it is to be safe. Right? For true Christians, it is safe. They will certainly arrive there. He's talking here about the sovereignty of God. Right? They will certainly arrive there. But transgressors shall undoubtedly fall along the way. Is there a place, Christian then asks again, is there a place here where pilgrims who are weary and faint may find temporary rest? Then he says, the Lord of these mountains have given us orders that we should not neglect the provision of hospitality for strangers. Therefore, the refreshing and good features of this place are at your disposal. And that's very interesting because you think before he's very cryptic. Kind of, but, it depends.
For some people, no, but some people,
yes.
You're like,
But here he says, when Christian asks, can we find rest here? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? So John Bunyan is showing, going to church doesn't guarantee you're going to heaven, but going to church should always be a place where everybody is welcomed to find refreshment for their soul. Right? So the church doesn't mean if you go to church, you're definitely going to heaven. But from a church perspective, local churches should always be welcoming to everyone who seeks for refreshment in their pilgrim's journey. Right? So that's I think the way that John Bunyan is depicting the importance of church membership, what church is and what it isn't.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I never really thought of it as as like a place of a church, but I guess that makes sense. You got the shepherds that are watching over, and even though when he's giving you the shepherds are giving him the telescope too, or the way to see the heaven, like this is where it is. This is like where you're heading, and you can you're still not there. But at the same time, you're still catching a glimpse of it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what the church is
absolutely
there for. So it's yeah.
Yeah, and that shows his perspective on the preaching of the Word of God, right? Because I think that's really what it's about, right? That telescope is allowing us to look forward through the Word of God, and these shepherds help them, give them an understanding to look forward to, and that's really what Sunday morning should be like, looking through a telescope into things that lie ahead, primarily, right? That point us forward on this pilgrim's journey. Now, one side note we should give here, and this is one of the reasons why I think John Bunyan at the beginning is doubting whether he should publish this book or not. It's written in a certain form as a journey, and you can't really have a whole group of shepherds kind of following him through this whole journey.
Yeah.
So I don't think John Bunyan is saying, this guy, Christian, never came to church until he's almost done with his journey.
Yeah.
Right? It's just one. It's almost like you have all these perspectives of the Christian life, and he just places them in a row. But all of these are obviously coming like in a sense, every week they're at the Delectable Mountain,
Right.
and in a sense they're part of that Delectable Mountain.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful way of describing what the church should be: a place of sweetness, a place of rest, like you said, a place of looking forward, what lies ahead. And at the same time, the Delectable Mountains itself are not a guaranteed place for heaven. Because actually, let me ask that question. What do you think for John Bunyan is the guarantee of somebody to reach the celestial city?
If they're faithful, they stay on the path. And, they
and
believe.
what place in the journey would you say is the defining?
That was the tomb.
Yes.
Yeah. Where he lays on the burden. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the separation between the false travelers and the true travelers. Right. That's where they receive their entry, their key. That's where they received all the things that's necessary to make it to the celestial city.
Yeah. So yeah, that's very interesting that the church is described as a place of sweetness as well, because I think some people have this misconception that church is like it's either a place where I have to set all my work aside. I have to set like all my fun things aside, and now I have to like go to church. And it used to be, it was weird for me because when I was a little kid, I mean, obviously I think some little kids have this perspective is, church is like, it was like a boring place to go. I felt like I was in prison on Sunday, and then I just can't wait for that last song so I can be released. But then of course, my perspective changes obviously as I'm growing in the Christian life. But yeah, for believers, a church is a place where it is sweet, where it is a place of rest and a place where, like the shepherds were doing, they were looking ahead they were showing them glimpses of the celestial city. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Yeah, can I put in one more thing?
Yeah.
One of them, I'm not sure if I can find this. So one of the other things that I thought was interesting, it says there, so upon agreeing that they should do this, the guests were first taken to the top of a hill called Error, which was very steep on the farthest side. There they were told to look down to the bottom. So Christian and Hopeful peered down, and there at the bottom they saw several men, all dashed to pieces, having fallen from the top. Sounds very cruel, but if you think about the picture of a church, that's what the shepherds of a church should do. They should point to the danger of error, right? So it's a sweet place, and yet it's a place where you are able to look into heaven. You're able to peer through the telescope and see forward. And at the same time, it's also a place where you learn of error and where you're warned against the dangers of falling aside. So here he takes one of the doctrinal errors out, and he shows if you're following that way, you're going to be dashed to pieces and you're going to fall. And that's, I think, one of the other responsibilities for the church that's important today. Right? The church should not only speak about the sweet things of God, but it should also be concerned about pointing out error to help pilgrims on their way. So I thought it was an interesting, important aspect of the church today that maybe it's kind of politically incorrect in our days to point to errors. We just want to teach positively. But I think as a Christian church, we should do both. We should teach what is right and warn people against what is bad.
Yeah. I think we have a hard time with conviction sometimes in churches today, where I think a lot of them might want to find some ways they want to empathize with you but instead of convict you, But I think sometimes we need conviction is just as important. So
Yeah, and I actually think this is my perspective, but I think for true Christians, conviction is actually comforting because it helps them to remind them, I'm on the right way. Because the whole Christian life starts with conviction.
Yeah.
Right? The Christian life starts with, what must I do to be saved?
Yeah.
And from there, we come to Christ. So I think... to me, when I'm convicted by a sermon, I go home refreshed. And when I'm comforted too. But if there's only comfort after a while, it kind of puts me to sleep in my spiritual life because I'm kind of like, okay, everything is sweet and nice. And I forget that we're in the middle of a war. And if it's only conviction, then I get exhausted. So there needs to be a balance of both.
Yeah. And I mean, like whatever is true is what I need more of in my life. And if I'm in a place where I'm just comforted all the time without any the comfort without conviction, because again you said conviction can be comforting, but if I just receive the comfort without the conviction, I'm kind of left a little bit uneasy because I'm just like, well, then why are all these issues still popping up in my life? Where are they coming from? And if I'm just being told the truth that, well, this is all starting from your heart, then I'm like, that's where I need to go. Or, that's where I need to ask God to, the Spirit to renew my thinking. Because, I can see where the root of the problem is, detect like where that lies. When
you get a thorn in your foot and you're stepping on it all the time, you don't want to pat on the shoulder.
Yeah.
You want someone to help you get the thorn out of your foot.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, excellent.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us in this episode. In the next episode, we have Christian and Hopeful first encounter character by the name of Ignorance. So,
if you don't want to be ignorant, you gotta watch the next video.
Yeah, you gotta watch the next video now. So, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. For more, be sure to follow us from wherever you're listening from, whether it be from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. To find us online, go to seventhref.org. We'll see you in the next episode.